The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of battle. On the surface of the alien planet, the ground shook as massive explosions ripped through the sky. Alien ships, once proud symbols of their empire's power, were falling from the sky, crashing into the landscape in fiery bursts. The alien warriors, trained for years in combat, fought with everything they had, but it was not enough. Among them was a young warrior named Solara, her heart heavy as she watched her people lose the war. Her once proud empire was crumbling before her eyes. The humans, who had been underestimated for so long, had come from beyond the stars with strength and fire unlike anything she had seen. They were relentless, unyielding, and their numbers seemed endless. Solara stood in the midst of the chaos, her armor stained with dirt and blood. She had fought hard, leading her squadron into battle against the human forces, but their weapons were too advanced, their tactics too sharp. The alien forces had no chance. Her people, who had ruled the galaxy for centuries, were being defeated by this new, strange enemy. She had heard the stories about humans, their greed, their violent ways. Her people had always looked down on them, seeing them as primitive and weak. They were nothing more than a nuisance, a small, insignificant species in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But now, standing in the middle of the battlefield, Solara saw the truth. The humans were not weak. They were strong. They were organized. And they were winning. As the last of her squadron fell, Solara found herself surrounded. She was alone now, her comrades dead or captured. She gripped her weapon tightly, prepared to fight until her last breath, but then something unexpected happened. A human soldier appeared before her, his weapon raised. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to burn with intensity. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there watching her, his face unreadable. Solara's heart raced. She had never been in this position before. She had always been the one to conquer, to lead. Now she was at the mercy of this human soldier. "Drop your weapon," the human said in a calm voice. His accent was foreign, but his words were clear. "You're not going to win this fight." Solara's grip tightened on her weapon. She wasn't going to surrender. Not to this human. But as she looked around, the reality of the situation hit her. There were no reinforcements coming. No one to help her. The war was over, and her side had lost. With a heavy heart, Solara lowered her weapon. The human soldier stepped forward, motioning for her to kneel. She hesitated for only a moment before obeying. She had been trained to fight, but she had never been trained to submit. "Pledge your service to me," the human soldier said, his voice low and steady. "Do it, and I will spare your life." The words caught her off guard. Solara, who had once led armies and been respected as a warrior, now found herself in a position of submission. She had never imagined that she would be forced to kneel before a human. It was humiliating, but it was also the only way to survive. With her head bowed, Solara spoke. "I pledge my service to you, human. Spare my life, and I will serve you." Human nodded, and for a moment Solara thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something like respect. But it was gone before she could fully understand it. As the human soldier gestured for her to stand, Solara's mind was racing. How had this happened? How had her world, her people, been brought to their knees by these humans? She had heard the stories, but she had never believed them. She had never thought that a human could be so powerful, so capable. But now, standing before her conqueror, Solara realized the truth. The humans were not just an enemy to be defeated. They were a force to be reckoned with. The soldier motioned for her to follow him, and Solara did as she was commanded. She had no choice. She was now a prisoner of war, and her fate was in the hands of this human conqueror. As they walked through the remains of the battlefield, Solara couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. How had it come to this? How had her once mighty empire been brought down so easily by these humans? She had been trained to think of humans as weak. But this human, this soldier, was not weak. He was strong, determined, and he had conquered her people. And now, Solara was left with only one option: serve the conqueror who had taken everything from her. The journey ahead was uncertain, and Solara did not know what her future held. But one thing was clear: her life had just changed forever. Solara followed the human soldier through the ruins of the battlefield, her mind racing. She had surrendered, but the feeling of humiliation still lingered. She had pledged her service to this human, but she did not understand why. Why had he spared her life? Why had he asked for her loyalty? Her thoughts were interrupted as they approached the human's command center. The building, once a place of power for her people, now stood as a symbol of their defeat. The doors opened with a loud hiss, and Solara followed the soldier inside. The room was filled with human officers and soldiers, all working quickly, their eyes focused on the mission at hand. She couldn't help but notice how organized and efficient they were. Every movement seemed deliberate, every task important. It was nothing like the chaos of her own empire, where pride and tradition often took precedence over practicality. As they moved through the room, Solara caught sight of the human leader. He was standing at a large table, surrounded by maps and holographic images of the galaxy. He was talking to his officers, his voice calm and commanding, but there was something different about him. He wasn't like the conqueror she had imagined. He wasn't cruel or cold as she had expected. Instead, he seemed human. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, but what stood out most were his eyes. Eyes that seemed to hold a deep understanding of the world around him. There was no arrogance in them, no hunger for power. He wasn't the monster she had been told to fear. The soldier who had captured Solara stepped forward and bowed his head respectfully. "General, the alien warrior has arrived." The general looked up from the table, his gaze meeting Solara's. She froze for a moment, feeling as if the world had slowed down. This was the conqueror, the one who had defeated her people. But when he spoke, his voice was not filled with the anger or cruelty she had expected. "Welcome," he said simply. "I trust you are unharmed?" Solara blinked, taken aback. This was not what she had imagined. She had expected threats, demands, perhaps even mockery. But instead, this human leader was offering her kindness? It made no sense. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the confusion inside her. She still held on to the pride of her people, even if she had been defeated. The general motioned for her to approach. "You may speak freely here. We are no longer enemies, only survivors of a war we did not choose." Solara hesitated but then stepped forward. She had been trained to face powerful leaders, to stand strong in the face of danger. But now, she found herself unsure of how to approach this human. She had been prepared to fight to the death, but now in this room, she was being treated with something she had never expected from her enemies. Respect. I don't understand," Solara admitted. "You've conquered my people, defeated us in battle. But now you treat me with respect. Why?" The general nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Because I do not see you as a conquered enemy. I see you as a person, just like any of my soldiers. I did not come here to destroy your people, but to end the war. War is never a choice for the innocent, and it should never be the goal of any leader. The choice to fight was made long ago by those before us, but now we can choose peace." Solara's heart raced as she listened to him speak. This was not the conqueror she had been prepared to face. She had expected a tyrant, a leader who reveled in domination and destruction. But this man was offering something different: peace, understanding. It was everything her empire had never been. "You do not want to destroy us?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "No," the general replied firmly. "I want to end the suffering. I want to build a future where we can live side by side. That is why I've spared you." Solara could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had been taught to fear humans, to believe they were nothing but violent conquerors. But this general, this human leader, was different. He didn't see her as an enemy. He didn't want to use her as a pawn in his war. He saw her as an individual. He looked at her for a long moment as if weighing something in his mind. Then, with a soft sigh, he spoke again. "I understand this is difficult for you. You've lost everything, your people, your world. But I believe that together, we can rebuild. I know you've pledged your service to me, but I ask this of you, not as a conqueror, but as an ally. Will you help me bring about the peace I've promised?" Solara's heart skipped a beat. The words echoed in her mind, and she realized the magnitude of the decision she was being asked to make. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about serving a conqueror. This was about hope. About a future she never thought possible. For the first time since her defeat, Solara felt a sense of purpose stir within her. She had once believed that her people's way was the only way, that their empire was the only future for the galaxy. But now, standing before this human leader, she saw that there was another way, a way of peace, cooperation, and unity. With a deep breath, Solara straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will help you. I will serve not as a conque, red enemy, but as an ally. I believe in this peace you seek." The general smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Thank you. Together, we will make the future better for all of us." As Solara stood there, she realized that the war was far from over. But for the first time, it felt as though the battle for peace had truly begun. Solara's life changed in ways she hadn't imagined since pledging her service to the human general. She had expected to be treated as a prisoner, as an object of power for her conqueror. But each day she found herself learning more about the humans and the general. Their ways were not like those of her people. At first, Solara was assigned small tasks around the human camp, cleaning, organizing, and serving the soldiers who had once been her enemies. But what shocked her the most was how she was treated. No one mocked her. No one humiliated her. Instead, the humans treated her with a surprising amount of respect. She couldn't ignore the stark difference between their behavior and that of her own people. In her empire, those who surrendered were often discarded, forced into servitude or worse. But here, among the humans, she was given tasks that allowed her to learn about them, their ways, their thoughts, and most surprisingly, she was allowed to speak freely. Her first assignment, to help set up a strategic meeting between the general and his officers, opened her eyes to more than she had expected. The humans had no fear of failure. They worked together, listened to each other, and never dismissed the ideas of others simply because of rank or status. Each officer, regardless of their position, was allowed to voice their opinions and be heard. The general sat at the head of the table, his calm, thoughtful demeanor steadying the room. The more Solara observed him, the more impressed she became. He never raised his voice, never grew frustrated. His leadership wasn't about making demands, it was about understanding. He was a human with a mind sharp enough to see the long-term picture, and he knew that unity among his people would win the war, not just brute strength. After the meeting, Solara approached one of the human officers, curious about what she had witnessed. "Is this how all humans lead?" she asked. The officer, a woman with short brown hair and a kind smile, looked at Solara thoughtfully. "We believe in teamwork," she said. "Every person's voice matters. Our general, he teaches us that no one is above the others, not even him. We are all equals in our mission." Solara was silent for a long time, her mind working through what she had heard. She had never seen such leadership before. In her empire, leaders were born to command, to hold power over others. But here in this strange human army there was a bond between them, one that went beyond mere obedience. Days turned into weeks, and Solara's understanding of the humans deepened. She learned their language fluently, and with it she began to understand their culture. The humans were not a weak species. They had strength, but it was not the brute force she had expected. Their strength came from their determination, their intelligence, and their unity. It was a different kind of power, one that required patience, planning, and careful action. During one particularly intense mission, Solara had the chance to witness the human general in action. A group of alien fighters had attacked a human outpost, and the general was quick to respond, organizing a counteroffensive. But what impressed Solara the most was not the precision of their attack or the speed with which they moved, but the way the general treated his soldiers. He called each one by name, making sure they were prepared, encouraging them when they faltered, and checking in with them when they returned from the battlefield. After the mission was over, he walked through the camp speaking to his men and women, ensuring they were recovering from the battle. There was no arrogance in his actions, no sense of superiority. He treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were new recruits or seasoned officers. Solara watched him, struck by the calm confidence he exuded. He didn't need to prove his strength through violence or power. His strength came from within. It was in his actions, in the way he led, in the way he connected with his people. One evening, as the sun set over the camp, Solara found herself standing beside the general. He was looking out over the horizon, his face calm and thoughtful. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. "You've come a long way from the battlefield, Solara," the general said, his voice quiet. "I know it must be hard for you to understand, to trust us, but you've been a great help." Solara nodded, but her mind was still spinning. She had never imagined that she would stand here, beside the man who had conquered her people, in a place of respect. She had never expected to feel grateful. But here, with the humans, she began to feel a sense of hope, something she had never known in her own empire. "The humans are different," she said, her voice soft, unsure of how to express what she was thinking. The general turned to her, his expression kind. "We are different, but that doesn't make us any less strong. We fight for each other. We fight for a future, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." Solara's chest tightened. She had always thought that her people were the strongest, the most powerful in the galaxy. But now, standing beside this human general, she realized that strength wasn't just about who had the most soldiers or the best weapons. It was about the will to protect, to care, to make the world better, even after all the destruction. The general's words stayed with her long after that night. She had pledged to serve him, but now she saw him not as a conqueror, but as a leader. A leader who wasn't driven by hatred, but by the desire to create something better. As the days passed, Solara continued to work with the humans, her mind constantly turning over what she had seen. She had thought that the war was over, that the humans had conquered her people. But now she saw that the real battle was not one of power, it was one of understanding. And for the first time in her life, Solara found herself fighting for something she hadn't believed in before: hope. The days continued to pass, and Solara's understanding of the humans deepened with each one. The general's calm strength had made a lasting impression on her, but it wasn't just his leadership that had changed her perspective. It was the way he led by example. He wasn't a man who sat behind a desk, barking orders. He was there with his people, fighting beside them, making decisions with them. The respect he had earned from his soldiers was something Solara had never seen in her own people. One morning, as she walked through the camp, she saw the human general standing in front of a group of his soldiers. They were gathered around a large map, discussing their next move. His calm voice could be heard even from a distance, offering advice and asking questions, making sure that everyone understood the plan. Solara had never seen this kind of teamwork before. In her empire, the leaders made decisions for the people. They told their soldiers what to do, expecting them to follow without question. But here, among the humans, it was different. The soldiers were involved in every step of the planning, their ideas taken seriously. The general didn't just command, he listened. He knew that to win, they needed to work together. That was how they had conquered so much of the galaxy, not just through force, but through unity. After the meeting, Solara approached one of the soldiers, a woman named Lila. Lila was a medic who had been stationed in the camp for weeks, tending to the wounded. Solara had watched her work tirelessly, and she was curious about the bond between the soldiers and their leader. "Do you always work together like this?" Solara asked. Lila smiled, wiping her hands on her uniform. "Yes, the general believes in us. He trusts us to do our part. He's the kind of leader who knows that the success of the mission depends on every single person. No one is left behind." Solara's brow furrowed in thought. "In my empire, leaders do not work alongside the soldiers. They give orders, and the soldiers obey." Lila's smile faded and she shook her head. "That's a shame. Here we know that our strength comes from being united. We stand together. If one person falls, we all fall. If one person succeeds, we all succeed." Those words lingered in Solara's mind long after the conversation ended. The more she learned about the humans, the more she realized how different they were from her own people. Her people had been powerful, yes, but they had relied on fear and control to maintain that power. The humans, on the other hand, relied on something else entirely: trust. That afternoon, Solara was called to the general's quarters. She had grown used to her new role, working as an assistant to the human officers, translating documents, and offering insights from her knowledge of her people's military strategies. But today, the general had asked to speak with her directly. When she entered his quarters, she found him standing by a window, looking out at the setting sun. There was something peaceful about him, as if he didn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Solara," the general said without turning around, "I need your help." Solara felt her heart race. She had been given tasks before, but never something as serious as this. "What is it, General?" she asked. The general turned to face her. "We're preparing for a large offensive against one of the remaining strongholds of your people. But I need someone who understands their tactics, someone who can help us anticipate their moves. You're the only one who can offer that knowledge." Solara hesitated. Her thoughts conflicted. She had once fought for her people, but now she was being asked to help the humans defeat them. It felt like a betrayal, but at the same time, it was the only way forward. She had already pledged her service to the human general. Now she realized that this wasn't just about survival. It was about helping to create the future that the general had promised. One of peace, understanding, and cooperation. "I will help you," Solara said, her voice firm. "I know their strategies, their weaknesses. I will do everything I can to ensure your success." The general nodded, his expression softening. "Thank you, Solara. I know this is not easy for you, but your insight is invaluable. Together we can bring an end to this war." In that moment, Solara realized just how far she had come. The human general had shown her a new path, one she never thought possible. She had once seen her people as the strongest in the galaxy, but now, standing beside this human leader, she understood that true strength didn't come from domination. It came from the ability to work together, to trust each other, and to build something greater than oneself. As the days passed, Solara worked closely with the general, offering her knowledge of her people's military strategies. She watched as he used her insights not for conquest, but to minimize the destruction of the war. Every decision was made with the goal of saving lives, both human and alien. It was a new way of thinking, one that Solara had never imagined before. Her loyalty to the general grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just because he had spared her life. It was because he had shown her that there was more to strength than fighting and conquering. There was also the strength to lead with compassion, to seek peace instead of destruction. Solara knew that the battle ahead would not be easy. But for the first time, she believed in the possibility of a future where the humans and her people could coexist. And it was all because of the bond of leadership the general had shown her, the kind of leadership that went beyond victory and defeat, and looked toward a better tomorrow. As the days passed, Solara found herself more and more entwined in the plans of the human general. Her knowledge of her people's military strategies had become invaluable, and the general relied on her input for his decisions. But as much as she had come to respect him, a deep part of her still wrestled with her loyalty to her empire. One evening, as she sat alone in her quarters, she received a message from her former commanders. The communication was encrypted, but Solara had learned to crack the codes they used. She opened the message and her heart skipped a beat as she read the words. It was an offer, an opportunity for her to return to her people's side. The message was simple but clear. Solara, you have a chance to redeem yourself. Your loyalty to the humans is a mistake. Return to us, and you will be given a position of power. You can still be the warrior you once were, but you must act quickly, before your trust in the human general becomes your undoing. The words echoed in her mind. She had never wanted to betray the general, but now, she was being given an opportunity to regain everything she had lost. Her people would never accept her if she remained with the humans. They would see her as a traitor. But this was different. This was a chance for her to return to a position of power, to reclaim her place among her people. For a long time she sat there conflicted. She had promised to serve the general, but now the temptation of returning to her people's side was strong. She could almost hear the voices of her former commanders, urging her to join them. They would not forgive her for choosing the humans, but they could still use her. Her knowledge and skills were worth far more than the respect she had lost. The thought of leaving the general was hard, though. He had shown her kindness, respect, and leadership. He had treated her as an equal, not a prisoner. He had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking, one that wasn't about power or domination, but about unity and peace. After hours of weighing the options, Solara made her decision. She couldn't return to her people, not after everything she had learned. The general had given her a chance to see a different path, and she couldn't abandon that. Her loyalty to him was stronger than the temptation to reclaim her old life. The next morning, she met with the general in his quarters. He was reviewing battle plans, but when he saw Solara, he set them aside and looked at her with a steady gaze. "Is something wrong?" he asked, sensing the tension in the air. Solara hesitated for a moment. This was the hardest conversation she had ever had. "I received a message from my people," she said quietly. "They want me to return to them. They offer me a place of power if I betray you." The general's eyes softened, but his expression remained calm. "And what did you decide?" "I chose to stay," Solara replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've learned too much from you. I believe in the future you're trying to build, a future where humans and aliens can coexist. I can't go back to a life of war, of endless fighting. You showed me another way." The general smiled slightly, but there was a weight in his eyes. "I understand," he said, "and I'm grateful for your loyalty. I can't promise that your people will ever accept you again, but I can promise you this. You have a place here. Your help is invaluable, Solara. I trust you." Solara's heart lifted at his words. For the first time since the war began, she felt at peace with her decision. She had chosen the path of unity, the path that would lead to a future of cooperation and peace. As the days went on, the general's trust in Solara deepened. She became more than just a military advisor. She became someone he could rely on, someone who understood not just the tactics of war, but the importance of building lasting relationships. The bond between them grew stronger, built on respect and mutual understanding. But even as she grew closer to the general, Solara couldn't shake the feeling of loss. Her people were still out there, struggling, fighting against the humans. She had made her choice, but she knew that her decision would come with a cost. Her former commanders would never forgive her. They would see her as a traitor, and there would be no going back. Yet deep down, Solara knew that her loyalty had not been misplaced. She had chosen the humans because she believed in their vision of a better future, one where war was not the answer, where there was hope for reconciliation. It was a vision worth fighting for. As the war continued, the human forces, with Solara's help, made great progress. The alien strongholds that had once seemed invincible were falling one by one. But each victory was not a moment of triumph for the general. It was another step toward peace, another step toward the dream of a galaxy united. One evening, as Solara stood beside the general looking out over the camp, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges and there would be obstacles, but as long as she remained by the general's side, she knew they would face them together. And for the first time in her life, Solara felt that her loyalty had found its true place, not in the empire she had once served, but in the promise of something greater, a future where humans and aliens could stand together side by side. The days had turned into weeks, and Solara had fully immersed herself in her new life with the humans. She had long since abandoned the thought of returning to her people, choosing instead to stand by the human general who had shown her what true leadership was. However, as the war raged on, Solara knew that the future of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The general's army was making remarkable progress. Alien strongholds were falling one by one, and with each victory, more and more planets were freed from the grip of her former empire. But with every battle won, Solara could see the toll it took on the soldiers. The cost of war was high, and though the general's leadership inspired those under his command, the weight of their mission was beginning to wear on them. One evening, as the general stood in front of a map planning their next move, Solara approached him quietly. There was a concern in her heart that had been growing for days. "General," she began, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty, "there is something I need to speak with you about." The general turned from the map, his dark eyes focused on her. "What's on your mind, Solara?" "I've been watching the soldiers, and I can see how hard this is for them. The pressure of constant battle. It's starting to break some of them down. I fear that if this continues, we'll lose more than we gain." The general nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen it too. The constant fighting, the loss, it's taking a toll on all of us. But the war won't end unless we continue pushing forward." Solara could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weariness that he tried to hide behind his strong demeanor. She knew he carried the burden of the war on his shoulders, but she also knew that they could not keep going like this forever. The human spirit was strong, but even the strongest could break under pressure. Perhaps there's another way," she suggested carefully. "We have made great progress, but we cannot continue without considering the lives that have already been lost. There must be a way to bring an end to this without further bloodshed." The general's gaze softened, but there was a moment of hesitation. "I've considered it," he admitted, his voice heavy. "But peace feels so far out of reach. The galaxy is divided, and my people, they are determined to finish what we started." Solara took a deep breath. She had never been one to shy away from difficult truths, but this felt different. It was as though they had reached a crossroads, where the path forward could no longer be determined by force alone. "I believe we need to speak to the leaders of the other side," she said, "the ones who still command the remaining forces of my people. We need to offer them a chance to lay down their arms to discuss peace." The general raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting negotiations?" "Yes," Solara said firmly. "We've seen the destruction caused by this war. We've seen the devastation. If we continue, we risk destroying everything, our worlds, our future. I know my people well enough to understand that they may not agree to peace immediately, but we cannot assume the worst without trying." The general looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. It was clear that he didn't take this suggestion lightly, but after a moment of silence, he sighed and nodded. "You're right," he said. "We've come so far, but we can't lose sight of why we're fighting. We're fighting for a future, not for endless war." Solara felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she also knew that taking this step was a risk. They could face resistance, not just from the leaders of the alien forces, but from their own soldiers as well. Peace, after all, wasn't something easily achieved in the midst of war. "We'll have to move carefully," the general said, his voice resolute. "I'll call for a ceasefire and reach out to the remaining leaders. We'll negotiate, but I won't make any promises until I know they are serious about peace." Solara nodded. I'll stand by you, General. Whatever happens, I believe in what you're trying to do." The general gave her a small but sincere smile. "I couldn't have come this far without your help, Solara. I'm glad you're here." The following days were tense as the general made contact with the leaders of the remaining alien forces. The news of the ceasefire was met with skepticism from many, and Solara knew that it would take time for both sides to fully trust one another. But the human general had made the first move, and that was a step toward the future they both wanted. The negotiations were difficult, and at times Solara could see the frustration in the general's eyes. But he never gave up. He was patient, willing to listen, and always kept the goal of peace at the forefront of his mind. He didn't allow anger or resentment to cloud his judgment, even when it seemed like the talks might fail. After several weeks of tense discussions, a breakthrough came. The alien leaders, exhausted by the war and the destruction it had caused, agreed to meet in person. It was a historic moment, one that Solara had never thought possible. The war, which had seemed endless, was now on the brink of ending. When the meeting took place, Solara stood beside the general, watching as both sides sat down to discuss terms. There were still many differences to overcome, but the human general's calm leadership and commitment to peace had begun to win over even the most stubborn of the alien leaders. As the talks progressed, Solara realized that this was the turning point. They had reached the moment when war could finally end, not through conquest but through understanding and compromise. The general had shown her that true strength didn't come from victory on the battlefield, but from the willingness to listen and build something better. As the first tentative agreements were made, Solara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she believed that peace could become a reality. The peace talks had begun, and the atmosphere in the human camp was filled with a mixture of hope and nervous anticipation. Solara had never imagined she would live to see this moment. The once fierce warrior who had been ready to fight to the death for her people was now standing alongside the human general, watching the beginning of something she had thought impossible: peace. The alien leaders who had once fought so fiercely against the humans were now sitting across the table, their eyes wary but their voices quiet, listening. The general had succeeded in securing the ceasefire, and now the negotiations were underway. Solara could hardly believe it. After so many years of war, after so much destruction and pain, peace was finally within reach. But she also knew that it would not be easy. Trust was something that couldn't be built overnight. Old wounds took time to heal, and not everyone would be willing to forgive and forget the battles that had been fought. As she sat in the corner of the meeting room, Solara watched the general carefully. His calm demeanor had not wavered, even in the face of the most difficult questions. He listened to the alien leaders, never interrupting, always patient. It was something that had drawn her to him from the start, the way he never let anger or frustration control him. His ability to stay composed in such high-stress situations was one of the reasons his soldiers admired him so much. And now, it seemed even the alien leaders were beginning to see the strength in him. Solara had always thought of strength as something that came from physical power, from fighting and winning. But now she understood that true strength came from understanding, patience, and the willingness to put the needs of others before your own. After hours of difficult negotiations, the first major agreement was made. The alien leaders agreed to a partial withdrawal of their forces from the contested regions. They would give the humans access to areas that had once been forbidden, allowing them to begin rebuilding together. Solara's heart soared with hope as the general shook hands with the leader of one of the most powerful alien factions. It wasn't a perfect solution. There was still much to work through, many challenges ahead, but it was a start. It was a beginning. When the meeting finally broke, the general turned to Solara, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "It's not over," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "There's still much to be done, but we've made progress. I couldn't have done it without your help." Solara smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "You've done it, General. You've shown us all a different way." The general nodded, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. "We've done it. All of us. Together. This isn't just my victory. It's a victory for all of us." Over the following days, the peace talks continued. More agreements were made, and the leaders began to work together, drafting plans for the rebuilding of both human and alien territories. For Solara, it was a strange experience. She had once believed in the strength of her empire, in the power of conquest. But now she was seeing firsthand that true power lay in cooperation and mutual respect. As the days turned into weeks, the general continued to work tirelessly, bringing the different factions together. Solara stayed by his side, advising him and offering insights into the alien mind, helping to bridge the gap between the two sides. Though there were still tensions, the process of rebuilding had begun. One evening, after a long day of meetings, the general and Solara stood on a balcony overlooking the camp. The stars were bright overhead, and the night air was cool and calming. It was a rare moment of peace, and Solara allowed herself to relax for the first time in a long while. "You've done something incredible," Solara said, her voice quiet, but filled with admiration. The general looked at her, his expression soft. "We've done something incredible. This wouldn't have been possible without you, Solara. Your loyalty, your knowledge. It's all been invaluable." She shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "I pledge to serve you, General, but you've shown me something I never thought I would see. A chance for a future where we don't fight, where we work together instead." The general nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "This isn't just about winning battles. It's about winning hearts and minds. It's about showing that we can all live together side by side. That's the real victory." Solara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had once been a warrior, driven by the desire to fight for her people, for her empire. But now, standing beside the general, she realized that her role in this new world was different. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a part of something greater, a movement toward peace, toward understanding. As the night wore on, the general turned to her. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. I know you've lost a lot. But I hope you know that your decision to stand with us, to help us, has made all the difference." Solara met his gaze, her heart full. "I've gained something too, a future I never thought possible." The general smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "A future we'll build together." And for the first time, Solara truly believed in that future. It was a future where humans and aliens could live together, side by side, not as enemies but as allies. It would take time, and it would take effort, but together they would build it. As she looked at the stars above, Solara knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth it. And for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. Hope for a future that was no longer defined by war but by the strength of unity.